I want to talk about the problem of Shieldmaidens and Crypto-Feminists in the right. And there are a lot of these characters. You've probably encountered some of them. Typically, they'll be older, childless women who have made some poor relationship decisions and kind of have a chip on their shoulder about men. And, they'll LARP as Germanic pagans. And they have this kind of weird ahistorical worldview where ancient Germanic societies were egalitarian and feminist, and it was possible to be a shield maiden or a warrior woman. And they think that these societies gave women some kind of special status or influence on account of their supposed magical woman knowledge that, oddly enough, never leads these particular individuals to say anything particularly new or interesting or helpful. And they they just kind of berate anybody who disagrees with them or challenges or contradicts or criticizes them or says anything that they perceive to be a threat on their privilege or entitlement, which is vast. And it's just very divisive. It's not very helpful. They never have any constructive solutions of their own. They just call for unity, which means submission to their dictates and demands. And, they'll typically have a cloud of weak beta male orbiters who they call upon to purge the movement of anyone they disagree with or dislike, which is pretty much anybody discussing these issues in a substantive way. And, a lot of people wonder where they come from. One theory I've heard is that the spread of intersectional feminism, where, white feminists are criticized for being too privileged, has kind of left them nowhere else to go but towards kind of like a trad nationalist, exclusively white feminism. And they're really just entryists. They're trying to get on board with something that they didn't create and they don't really contribute to in order to amass personal status and influence by the use of feminine coercion, nagging, scolding, shaming, rallying, mockery, ridicule, gossip. And it's really unproductive and it's really divisive and contentious. These means don't really contribute anything to the discourse. And they're going to be in the comments of this video. They're going to be down there talking about my weight and speculating about the size of my reproductive anatomy and my supposed, relationship failures and everything else. And this is really not productive because I talk about facts, which are measurable, and I talk about logic, which is, more open to interpretation. But I don't mind anybody who criticizes or contradicts me as long as they have a reasonable point of view and they use honest means, good faith means, to offer constructive, helpful solutions to the issues that I bring up. And these people don't do that. They just shriek and, nag and scold and everything else, just like any other feminist. And, the shield maiden bit is the easiest to dispense with because I've talked about women in the military in the past, and it just doesn't make any sense, especially like frontline combat units. You don't want women in the military because men will have on average twice the upper body strength of women and half again the lower body strength, and something like 99% of women are less strong than the average man. And so there are a few that can compete at like a masculine level, but they're not many. And so you're not really missing out on much by just, failing to consider them for those positions. And, even if they do meet some kind of arbitrary minimum criteria, they're not going to exceed it by as much on average as men who meet the same standards. And so you really don't want to employ any women in these capacities as long as there's a man who you could employ instead in the same capacity. And that's just on an individual effectiveness level. And once you talk about the costs of training, and you got to wash out so many more women to find the qualified candidates and injure so many more women, and that's tremendously costly. It's just slam dunk. And Then you start looking at factors of unit cohesion and morale and group dynamics and drama and all that. And it's just double slam dunk. And finally, there's the issue of, you don't want to take foolish risks with the uteruses, because the uterus is the scarce factor in human reproduction or mammalian reproduction. And so, that's the limiting factor. That's the bottleneck. So you don't want to take foolish risks with the uteruses when there's any cock and balls you can risk instead. Because if your society loses a few men, that's not a huge deal. If it loses a few women, it's a much bigger deal. If you lose a lot of men, that's still not as catastrophic as losing a lot of women, because then your population is going to be depressed for a long, long time. It's going to be very difficult for it to rebound. So, you just don't want to take foolish risks with the women, and they're not as good at this kind of stuff anyway. And so, that's a big part of why we don't see that historically. And the historical evidence that they use to argue for this Shieldmaiden thing is kind of sketchy. There are Germanic women who are found buried with arms and armor, and that doesn't mean they were relied upon in a martial capacity by their societies. Maybe it just means that arms and armor were symbols of wealth and status in their societies. And we know that women were expected to bring, in some ancient Germanic civilizations, or societies rather, were expected to bring a gift of arms and armor as a dowry for their husband. So they were involved in the bestowing or displaying these items. But that doesn't mean they were relied upon in a martial capacity. And you just don't see that very often. It might have happened here and there. Some peoples might have done it. There might have been some women warriors here and there, but it just wasn't a big thing. It just never has been a big thing, because it's dumb. And, whether or not any particular ancient civilization actually did this is pretty irrelevant, because, it's still a bad idea. So we can dispense with that. And as for the issue of, women having some kind of special, magical woman knowledge, some kind of special insight that entitles them to status and influence in society, well, I'm just not seeing that. We've had them voting for 100 years now, and as far as I'm aware, on every issue where they vote systematically different from men, they vote worse. They favor dumber policies, they propose dumber policies, and this is mainly just a consequence of their sensibilities not being tuned to that scale. Women have perfectly valid sensibilities and perfectly apt sensibilities for taking care of infants and young children, but that doesn't really scale to a social level or an economic level or a political level, because you can't run a society or an economy or a polity on the same basis or the same terms that you would manage a household or a family. And there are plenty of reasons why you'd want the men to head the household too, but women do bring valuable insights and skills and abilities to the household and to the family, and they can be honored for those. But as for according them influence and status on a social or a political scale, their sensibilities just don't really scale to that level. But unfortunately, these women, most of whom are older, childless women, they do amass kind of a following of younger women who still have some value or potentially have some value, and they really just sour these women and turn them onto a bad path, and teach them pathological ways of interacting with men and relating to men, and trying to get what they want from men, which is by employing the feminine means of coercion. It's just not really helpful, and it's not productive, and they don't offer any constructive solutions. Because like I said, I'm bringing up real issues, and I'm mentioning real facts, and my arguments or interpretations certainly could be flawed, but they have to be criticized on that basis. They can't be just bringing up my junk or commenting on my weight doesn't really address any of that. It's just it's pretty irrelevant, actually, and pretty unproductive and unhelpful. And so they also amass these kind of followings of weak beta males who create this echo chamber and provide this, source of support that they think they're calling upon to purge people like me who say things that they perceive to be against their interests. And really, I'm not against the interests of women. I want women to do well and be happy just like men. And I think feminism doesn't help them in that respect. Women have gotten miserable since the 70s, measurably more miserable. And they're on antidepressants and all this kind of stuff, in large part because of feminism and the demands and the expectations placed upon them that are really unreasonable, given their constitutions. And, a lot of this stuff doesn't help them. Like the breakdown in marriage and family and, traditional family values and sexual mores and stuff, it doesn't help women. This promiscuous, licentious society, gives them like this buffet of options, or supposed options, what they think are options, but it really doesn't help them out. And when you look at opportunity cost, that becomes obvious. If I offer you a Snickers bar, that's a benefit. Well, if I offer you a choice between a Snickers bar or a pack of M&Ms, choice is better, right? Well, not necessarily. In the first case, I just gave you a benefit. In the second case, I offered you a choice between two similar benefits. And so the benefit is only the marginal benefit or the incremental benefit of picking one choice over the other. So more choice is not necessarily better, and it doesn't necessarily make you better off than less choice. And we can see this with the marriage market or the dating market or the mating market or whatever you want to call it, and especially for normal women, this is really a trap because, we're talking about like the 5 to 7 range on the 10-point scale. Women who are attractive, they're not unattractive, they're not maybe the hottest women. And so, in a promiscuous, licentious society, the thing is, maybe the 9 or 10 Chad will sleep with them on an off day, right? But he's not going to offer them any commitment. So they develop really unrealistic expectations. They want a man who treats them nice and who provides for them, but they also want him to look like, the 9 or 10 Chad who's going to sleep with them on an off day and have the same kind of income. And it's just really unrealistic expectations, and it leads them to wait far too long to settle down. And they don't do as well as they could because they're past their prime. And they don't, they end up with some third rate when they finally do settle as the wall approaches. And they've tasted of the forbidden nectar of alphadom and all that, and so they're kind of ruined for it. And that's part of why our divorce rates are so outrageous, and our marriages are falling apart. And we need those marriages because children who come from a stable home with two parents have much better outcomes, and we can't afford to sacrifice that any longer for this kind of bitchy sense of entitlement, or for any other reason. It just doesn't make sense. So certainly I'm biased, and I come with my own biases and perspectives, and maybe I wish I could do better in the market than I can. I know some of the reasons why I haven't, and I do expect to settle down within the next couple of years and start on a family, hopefully. And it'd be nice to be able to do better than I probably will, but that's not something I can change right now, but it is something that has to change for our civilization and our society to move past this phase. And it's real issues that we need to address. And so these Shieldmaidens, they don't offer any kind of constructive or helpful suggestions. They really just try to shut down and stifle debate with their, controversial, kind of contentious style of disputation. And it's not helpful. These people, they claim to be trad, they claim to be pro-white, but they're not. So, just stop taking them seriously and stop feeding them.